hard to believe. If there were a master of absurdity, they would definitely be called super absurd. Today, Uncle received another call for help. His grandfather's younger brother, John Poo, tried to haul a bit more cargo a few days ago and ended up breaking the rear axle of his truck. When Uncle saw the situation, he could only shake his head. But out of compassion, he couldn't bear to see Jean Poo lose income over this. So, he told him to bring the rear axle to a well-known repair shop for repairs. Before repairing, the rear axle needed to be supported with a stand. These two stands have been with the master for 45 years and have earned him a lot of money. Next, the rear axle was tightly bound with iron chains and a jack was placed on top of the axle. You might be wondering what they're doing? Actually, they're using the principle of leverage. As the jack lifts, the chains on both sides get tighter. When they reach a certain tension, they use a gas-cutting flame to heat the unbroken end of the axle, which helps the gap in the axle gradually close. This is why they needed the iron chains. The master is truly creative, true craftsman in the repair industry. When the gap was as close as possible, they used a welding machine to temporarily weld the broken part in place. Because the gap was so large, the master was welding while smoking, welding the front first, and then the back to increase stability, laying a solid foundation for the rest of the repair. Then, they removed the jack and chains, and rotated the axle to check for any large deformation. Next, the master used an old-fashioned inspection tool to check the straightness of the axle. If the tool's needle didn't swing wildly during rotation, it meant the axle met the standard. Afterward, they would proceed to repair the entire crack on the axle. When we talk about welding, it's not just a display of skill, but also an expression of art. The welding torch in the master's hand was like a magic wand, turning broken metal into a solid connection. After welding, the master used a hammer to knock off the slag, wiped it clean with a cloth, and marked the points for cutting. The gas-cutting flame in the master's hand could cut thick metal, like cutting through paper. Each cut was a perfect combination of precision and force. After cutting, the master used a metal punch to knock off the surface layer, then cut small triangles on the inner layer, cutting them completely into two pieces. The master then flipped the two pieces over, combined them into a larger triangle, and temporarily welded them in place. Next, the master found a discarded steel plate, drew its shape, and cut the steel plate according to the drawing. You see, the master's technique is so precise. Without 40 years of experience, it would be hard to cut so straight. Next, the master used a grinder to smooth the edges of the cut on the axle and the steel plate. After grinding, the master tested the steel plate on the axle and found that the burrs on both sides made it difficult to fit in. So the master ground it further until it fit perfectly, then hammered it into place and welded all three sides. During the welding process, the master adjusted the angle to ensure everything was flawless. After 45 minutes of meticulous welding, the triangular pieces were fully welded. The master then knocked off the welding slag and polished the surface with a grinder. After installing the triangular piece, the master installed a hexagonal piece in the same way. This layered fixing method is unique in the world. This technique is a secret of the master's shop and is not taught to others. Today, to thank Uncle for spreading positive energy, the master agreed to record the video. Finally, the master welded the inside of the axle, sealing all the gaps. Then, the master evenly polished the entire surface, pre-installed the axle casing, and checked it again. If everything was fine, the master would spray paint on the welded areas. At this point, truck's rear axle repair was completed. The truck owner, upon receiving the call, rushed over and was so pleased that he gave the master a thumbs up. So, have you learned anything?